All right, so thank you, Emily, for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to be a little bit different from some of the other presentations. My background and position here is mostly on ornamental crops, but I'm going to give a few updates about some new diseases that we're seeing on ornamental crops, just to kind of keep an eye out for, and then talk about ornamentals, but also other edible crops as potentials for windbreaks. And I'll get into why we're talking about that in this set of presentations today when I get to the windbreak section. But as Emily mentioned, I'm the Ornamental Crops Extension Agent for Kauai, and I'm also the Master Gardener Coordinator for Kauai, so end up delving into not just ornamentals through that. All right, getting right into it, this is a disease that we've seen so far only on Kauai, but there has been a similar one that was recently reported on Big Island. And I know a lot of times folks here are great in that they diversify their plantings. They're not just growing bananas, but they're growing other things as well. Also in landscaping, we see costus. So this one, it looks a lot like red ginger, but this is actually Costus barbatus. And you can tell it apart from nothing else of these true yellow flowers that pop out. This has been a mainstay of cut flower producers on the island. Lasts really long, it produces really well, but unfortunately, just in the last few years, we've started noticing these dead leaves and start to see spots that are showing up on the flowers. At first, we were kind of like going under a few different hypotheses, kept eliminating them. And as we started looking at them more, we started to notice some patterns. You can see kind of rings in some of these holes. If holes like these were forming without these rings, we had thought might be herbicide damage. But looking at the rings and kind of seeing other symptoms, we now have a tentative diagnosis as anthracnose. And I should say this is not, this is related to the anthracnose that affects mangoes. I know there's other types of anthracnose out there. We don't believe so far that this is cross-infective. So that if you see it on costus, it's not going to go and affect your mangoes probably. But we are asking folks who see it on plants to please let us know. I know one commercial grower ended up taking out his whole planting of it. That was the first time I'd seen it. But then I have since seen it in different commercial settings and in different landscape settings, including even in my backyard in my landlady's garden. We're working with the USDA to get a little bit more information and come up with some treatment, but we want to make sure that we kind of stay ahead of this. So if you do start seeing this, please reach out to me. And I had my email on the first slide. I'll put it again, or it's on the last slide as well. And as you can see, unfortunately, this doesn't only affect the plant, but also makes the flowers unsaleable. We had a few folks who found out the hard way that you would cut the flower, it would look all right, and then after a few days in a shipping box, you know, going to the mainland or even inter-island, they'd end up like this one on the right. Another disease that I wanted to kind of highlight today of ornamentals, because this is really widespread as well, is the red ginger virus complex. This was identified first by Roselle Galanti, who's the ornamental extension agent, both for Big Island and temporarily for Oahu as well. We are hiring on an additional agent just for Oahu. This has been identified so far on all of the major islands, both in landscape plants and in commercial settings. And unfortunately, what it tends to do is really knock back these red gingers. I mentioned that they look a little bit like the costus, but we're seeing that, you know, it not only reduces the plant growth, you can see the sort of yellowing and dead leaves, but also starts having other sort of unanticipated side effects. And unfortunately, some of these folks have actually been growing them because they think it looks really pretty. So in the upper right is one called Polynesian Princess that's been in circulation. People were actually paying more money because it has this really neat flecking on the flowers. We now unfortunately believe that that flecking is caused by a virus, kind of like what happened with tulips. There, you know, were different color breaks resulting from viruses. And so we're trying to encourage folks to kind of phase out growing ones of these that they see that have these symptoms. For this presentation, I've kind of focused on Kauai. I know we have folks tuning in from across the state. There are a range of different viruses that have been identified that seem to be related to the symptoms. Originally, they thought there was a fungal aspect as well. That seems to not be playing as large a role. But again, I want to emphasize that these are the viruses we're seeing here on Kauai. These are not necessarily the viruses that are causing the same symptoms on other islands. So reach out to Russell if you are experiencing this and are on another island. So we've seen Canna yellow mosaic virus here. Tends to be these kind of yellow flecks kind of along the veins. As the name suggests, it is also present in canna plants, which I know are also used in a lot of landscaping. We have some, in fact, right out here, which look a lot like they have the virus, but I haven't been able to check definitively with that. And then we also have a new virus that hasn't been named yet. We're calling it virus A, super original right now. This one is very similar, except instead of flecks, you see a lot more of this kind of severe yellowing between the veins of the plant. And when you get the combination of both kind of this Canna yellow mosaic virus and virus A, you get this really stunted plant that has these kind of yellow leaves. It's not able to grow to a full size, and it starts to affect other parts of the plant's function. Other islands are seeing some other viruses, as I mentioned, in combination, and the result can either be plants that are just not thriving or ones that are actually dying from it. What you can do to control it if you do see it, we have a few recommendations. One thing is to avoid extra fertilizer. I know sometimes our instinct is, give the plant a little boost to fight it off, but we found actually it seems to kind of encourage the viral spread. And part of that is because of the relationship between the plants and then also mealybugs and aphids, which we think might be spreading the viruses. We've also found that mulching and increasing organic matter seems to help reduce the virus severity. And this might have to do with kind of things related to these other 2 points. Mulching and organic matter help with soil moisture. And so we're not saying we want these plants to be soaking wet, but we kind of want a consistent moisture level. Mulching seems to kind of help with that. And then also plants that are under shade seem to, even if they have the virus, not be as severe, but also seem to kind of avoid getting the virus a little bit longer. And again, mulch is kind of helping with some of this kind of cooling effect as well. Another thing you can do, and this I think dovetails pretty well with what I'll be talking about in just another slide or two, is you can set up windbreaks or barrier crops around gingers. This is more relevant if you're kind of growing at a commercial scale. I know we have a range of different growers here today. But the windbreaks or barrier crops allow the pests that might be carrying these viruses to essentially clean their guts off, like, what is it they say, an amuse-bouche or an aperitif, where you're cleaning your palate. This is doing that, but for the insects, it's cleaning the virus out, so that even if they do go and feed on your gingers, they're not necessarily going to be carrying the viruses with them. And then kind of going back to what I said at the beginning here about avoiding excess fertilization, this is the recommendations we're now giving for people who want to do red ginger production. So again, you see, relatively low on the nitrogen, and then a range of different macros and micros. And as Emily said, this will be recorded, so you can kind of refer back to this later. All right, so ornamental stuff aside, getting kind of into the windbreaks. One of the reasons Emily asked me to give this talk is as we're, I don't want to steal Amjad's thunder, but one of the things that comes up with bananas is a lot of growers, especially commercial growers, use bananas as windbreaks. They're great, they have these nice kind of barrier type leaves. They're really helpful in terms of calming wind. Unfortunately, we're trying to kind of move away from that because that can be a real reservoir for banana bunchy top virus. And again, Amjad will touch on that more. So I wanted to give some suggestions for other crops you can use as windbreaks, since they play a really important role in conservation and ecology, as well as just kind of pleasantness as you're, working with landscaping or working on a commercial farm. Most of the plants here are taken from 2 different websites. They're long websites, so I've kind of shortened them. And again, you can either get this now, or you can get these from the recording of this. One thing is just pay attention to the capitalization of the letters at the end of the shortened link. And then Another thing is most of the plants that are in these two publications have already been assessed for weed risk. I think one of the publications was older and then was revised. But I want to kind of get the word out about if you're looking at a plant that you're thinking about planting and are not sure if it's weedy or not, especially if it's something you don't see other folks growing as much. Plantpono.org is an amazing website that lists the weed risk of different plants. And they also will take requests. So if there's a plant that isn't on there, they can come up with some weed risk scores for you, let you know, and then publicize it too. So we've used this a lot in our professional life. And I just want to get the word out, make sure everyone else has heard about it. So with that, I'm just going to go through some different windbreaks and highlight them as different roles that they might play in a commercial setting, but also in a landscape setting. Oh, and before I forget, the nice thing, windbreaks are functional, but they can also be useful in conservation because they avoid things like wind erosion of soils. Because of that, if you work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service or NRCS, they might be able to reimburse you for a windbreak. I believe they have a list of approved plants, and I wasn't able to kind of square that list with all of the plants I have today, but I encourage you to reach out to them. This is the shortened link to their Kauai offices page with contact information. But if you go to that, you can also see it for the neighbor islands and also looking across the state. So, all right, getting into some of the plants. I think I did edibles first and then some ornamentals and some other functional ones thrown in there. Pigeon pea is one that I really like because it's something that can potentially be as short-lived as even an annual. And it's a legume, so it's a nitrogen fixer. This is used a lot in local cuisine. I'm sure a lot of y'all have tried gandules before, as they're kind of known. They can be used green, they can be used dry. And these are giant, massive plants when they get going. You know, they can have a decent sized trunk. We've grown them as sort of temporary crops within our fields. And I believe Emily even had a project looking at them as alternatives to physical cages. So these are one type of crop that might be really good as a temporary windbreak that then you can till in, or maybe interplant as you're waiting for a kind of slower windbreak to grow. Roselle is another one. This is one that I've seen a little bit in the markets here, but this I really like to kind of see more folks working on. It's a hibiscus relative. If you've ever had a tea that has hibiscus listed as an ingredient, this is the hibiscus they're talking about. It's actually the calyx, it's not the flower, but right behind there it's kind of fleshy, it's sour. It's used in different cuisines. Thailand, Vietnam, I know use them and sell drinks made from them. And this is one where there's also quite a bit of variation. These are pretty good, strong roots and form kind of not a super tall windbreak, but a decent sized one. Again, this is more kind of an annual to maybe 2 or 3 years, but something short term that you could use and get a harvestable crop off of, and then go back later on and put in something else, or use it while you're waiting for a longer term windbreak to grow in. Tamarind, most of the folks I know, when they think tamarind, they think large trees with lots of pods really high up. I was privileged enough to work with a group in Thailand that used tamarind as a landscape plant and had a hedge maybe 3 to 4 feet tall from it. They had the labor that they could keep it maintained that way, but it would still set pods, it would still produce leaves, and so it was both functional in that way, as well as being kind of attractive. And again, tamarind's another nitrogen fixer. If you do want to let it grow to a full-size tree, that's also totally an option, but you can maintain it as something smaller, and again, have kind of a niche crop that you could be either selling or using for your own kind of at-home use. Tamarind used in all sorts of cuisines. I'm not going to list them all in detail, but really excellent. And again, you know, great to have that nitrogen fixing ability. Bamboo is one that I'm seeing more and more folks work with. Some bamboos are kind of better than others. There's ones that are edible for one thing that you could get. It does require some preparation to kind of make sure that they are edible. My stepmom's Chinese though, and every year she harvests the bamboo near our house for bamboo shoots and then boils them to get rid of the toxins and prepares them. Also very functional, you know, both from a landscaping and from just a farm infrastructure point of view. Great at blocking wind, but also good if you need a good source of renewable sticks. And I've even seen folks using these for production of things like biochar, which I know is of interest to quite a few growers. So one to consider, look into different types of bamboos though, and see which ones might kind of fit your farm or your landscape better. Tea plants, this is one that I was kind of surprised to see within the publications. I think I'm used to seeing them as just kind of planted sparsely, but these can be really effective windbreaks. I also wanted to kind of give a shout out to HARC, HARC, which is the Hawaii Agricultural Research Center. They actually did some work putting traditional tea plants into tissue culture and removing viruses from them through a process of kind of like basically culturing or cloning the plant faster than the virus could reproduce. And what they found was when they took them out of tissue culture and grew them, they had leaves all the way from the base of the plant up to the top. This is not what I was used to seeing, especially with kind of the green tea that we see for Lau Lau. But they said, you know, without these viruses that have been in for generations, the plants are a lot healthier and they would form a more effective windbreak. I believe they're kind of scaling up production, but kind of watch this space for future options in more tea plants. And these are also useful even if you're using them for cooking, or again, if you just want to use them ornamentally and just have kind of a nice barrier. Croton is one I hadn't thought of a lot as well before as a hedge or as a windbreak, but it does grow pretty densely, really useful in terms of cut foliage for arrangements, but also something cheerful. And one thing that I like is I think people tend to have kind of a very slim view of what they view as a croton, maybe something over here on the left. On the right is one that won an award in a show in Thailand. And some of these specialty crotons are actually going for a good amount of money. You know, I'm not saying you have to start becoming a croton farmer just for that reason, but there's a lot of variation now in crotons. And if you want to kind of consider some different croton options, there are some really great ones hitting the market. So look around the nurseries and reach out if you're trying to kind of track down some more unusual types. Dracaena or Song of India, again, this is one that's relatively common in terms of cuts. We see kind of the green form more often called Dracaena, the variegated form called Song of India. Really, really popular with florists. I see this used all the time in arrangements. Very easy to propagate from cuttings and forms a really dense but attractive landscape plant as well. So one that again could be functional landscaping and then also as a cut if you wanted to use it that way. Heliconias. Heliconias are one that we see used in arrangements, but I think not nearly as much as we could. And we actually were lucky, a previous faculty member here on Kauai had done some collection decades and decades ago in Central and South America, managed to get the permits and bring these back carefully and without introducing other diseases. He made some selections and introductions, and we have these up at the station if there's interest in trying these in a commercial scale. Some of them we released, and so they actually have a name, like Kauai Morning Sun, but there's other ones that are just numbered. And there's a huge range of these. We even have kind of the taller ones. The two on the left here tend to be shorter. They're maybe 5 feet, 6 feet, can be a little bit more or less than that. Rostrata over here on the right, also useful in arrangements. This is tall, 10, 12 feet, something like that. So, if you're looking for a privacy screen that can also provide you with some flowers, this might be a really good option. And then Copperleaf or Beefsteak plant. This is one that I see a lot in landscaping, but I think could be used even more. And I've seen more and more kind of floral designers starting to go to it. It's nice. It forms a very dense sort of thicket. And so it's good for kind of, a little bit of privacy as well as blocking the wind while not being too much of an eyesore. So I'm trying to get folks to kind of experiment with this a little more. And we are seeing a little bit of variation out there in terms of what's on the market. And then hibiscus. Hibiscus, despite these beautiful flowers, not used as much for the commercial side, just because the flowers tend to last one day. But boy, what a great visual treat. And there's been a bunch of research, including work coming out of UH, about kind of the mental health benefits of having attractive plants like these around. I think we've also kind of gotten inured to sort of these typical hibiscus hedges with pinks and yellows and whites. There's some really great, interesting new cultivars coming out. The three on the right are ones that I've seen at local um, plant nurseries and are easily available. Lava Girl there with the red with the yellow flecks, Midnight Tryst at the bottom, and I don't believe I even have the name of the one in the upper right, but ones that could form a really great visual impact, block the wind, and could be a short-term or a long-term sort of planting for your own enjoyment, or for propagation and sales to nursery. If you wanted to kind of grow this as a mother plant and then graft it onto rootstock, that would be a great option as well. And then finally, talking native plants. Again, on this page, I just happen to have hibiscus because I know they're already approved, but I know there are other native plants that form great windbreaks or hedges. We have clayii in the upper left that's endangered. I believe this is Arnodianus in the bottom left, which is fragrant, and then Brackenridgii. One thing to keep in mind with these is a lot of these are endangered, and so making sure that you're getting them from an ethical distributor. They typically have those red tags at the bottom that kind of say this plant was propagated, not taken from the wild. But this Brackenridgii is by far the most vigorous hibiscus I've grown, including any sort of commercial type. It is that plant that you see is subsumed about 6 other commercial hibiscus plants in the course of 2 years. And they actually root really easily from cuttings, but again, making sure that you're not reintroducing them to the wild and complicating conservation efforts. But some really, you could be doing this, getting in touch, getting a permit for endangered plant cultivation, and then selling these to nurseries and kind of having both, a source of native plants and sort of an income stream, as well as participating in conservation efforts. With that, I'll open it up to questions and again, list my email address and just a photo I'm including from an agricultural fair I went to in Thailand where they talked a lot about functional, but also attractive. And everything in this photo is an edible plant of some sort that they had then turned into a hedge, basil, lemongrass, snake gourds, all of that. So just kind of challenging these thinkings. We could use bananas as windbreaks, but we could be having other things that either kind of add to the landscape appeal or add another income stream.